and welcome to Think Watercolour. Today I'm going to demonstrate how I painted this typical English winter countryside scene of fields and distant hills. I've sketched out the layout very roughly on a block of Baohong pure cotton watercolour paper. It's 300 g natural white rough. It's really good quality paper, this paper. I've used it before many times and it's a lovely paper if you want a really good rough surface. This is cobalt blue. I've not wet the sky first, I'm just putting it straight on, and I'm going to add a touch of permanent rose. Just to give part of the sky a slightly purple effect, and some clear water just to bring it down to the horizon line. I want the sky to be much lighter where it meets the distant hills. Just adding a little bit more pigment at the top. Not being too specific, it's just a clear blue sky. I'm trying to depict a bright sunny day, a little bit of hazy sunshine maybe, just reflecting light on the snow on the hills and in the areas in the foreground where there's snow lying on the ground. I'm using the same colour to put in some foreground shadows, using the tooth of the paper with some dry brush right at the front, and a little bit more further back. Using the same mix for the distant hills, just to mark out where the different shapes of the hills and fields are. A bit of shadow in the distance. Just going to use some clear water to soften the edges in the foreground. In snow, you don't get too many hard edges, so just giving them a more gentle feel. Just mixing up some yellow ochre and some touch of raw sienna just to darken it slightly. I'm going to use this with a rigger, number 3 rigger, just to show some of the distant furrows in a field, an old ploughed field where the earth is showing through and the stubble from the harvest is showing through the snow. And I'm using the same colour in the foreground just to mark out the furrows in the ploughed field in the foreground. Some stubble left over from the harvest, as I said before. Further away, less clear, just some rough lines, using the roughness of the paper. Just mixing up some jadeite green and some burnt sienna just to darken the green a little bit and take some of the greenness away from it, just to make it more of a tree colour for the distant hedges. and there's a row of trees along that distant field there. Once I've put this initial wash in, I'm going to add more pigment at the base just to create some variation in tone and value and suggest shadow. This darker tone will, I'm using a little bit of cobalt blue just to darken it. This will bleed up to the top of the trees, but it creates that nice soft blend from top to bottom, light to dark, just indicating the edge of the distant hedge there. Just water down the mix a little bit for the distant hedges, just to help break up the background, suggest a few fields and hedges and hills. Just added a touch of burnt sienna to the yellow ochre mix. Just going to use this for the area just below the hedge that's going to be near to us. Just a bit of earth showing through the snow. I'll add some darker patches as we go along. Just using the side of the brush just to feather some of that into the what's going to be the hedge. Just using a lighter version of the tree mix just to delineate the tops of the distant hills, just so the eye's drawn to them a little bit, but not too much. This is ultramarine and burnt sienna, dark, very dark mix for the silhouetted foreground trees. These are the focal point of the painting. There's a hedge along either side of the trees, so I'm just using this number 3 rigger to put those details in. Just using the edge of an old credit card just to drag some of the wet wash into the background, just to create some branches of bushes in the hedge. I tried to keep this painting simple so that anybody who wants to attempt it themselves can do so. It's a very simple layout, easy to follow. Just using the side of the rigger to pick up the tooth of the paper to break up the hedge. Just adding some more pigment at the base of the hedge. I want that to be the darkest part of the hedge. As it goes up, the the branches get thinner and less distinct. I've switched to a number 0 rigger now for the thinner branches at the top of the trees. You can do this with a splayed out old Chinese brush or an old worn out brush just as easily, but I quite enjoy using a rigger. The trick with doing trees like this in silhouette is just to keep it simple and just follow a rough fan shape, crisscrossing the branches at the top, softening them, making them slightly lighter. Just adding a few blobs here and there to suggest some abandoned nests where birds have flown south for winter. And again, just using the side of the rigger, just with some lighter colour, a little bit more water in it, just to do the tops of the branches. Again, not being too specific. The trick with things like this is knowing when to stop. Same with any part of a painting where there's detail. Don't overdo it. I mean, the idea of that distant row of trees is to lead the eye to where the focal point is, which is the silhouetted tree. So I think that's working quite nicely. I just need to add some foreground detail just to bring the eye forward, so you get this idea of depth. So again, using the side of the rigger and the tooth of the paper just to delineate these furrows with bits of old harvest sticking out through the snow. Again, not being too specific with these furrows in the distance, but as we get closer I'm going to start painting a little bit more detail so the eye is brought forward for the detail and then taken back into the painting for the focal point. I'm still using that number 0 rigger. It's ideal for these fine bits of twig of the what's left over from the last harvest. Back in the day they used to burn this stubble off, but I'm not so sure they do that these days. Just a little bit more detail in the foreground just to bring the eye forward to give the painting some depth. I've noticed I've got a couple of dots of paint in the sky, and at the end of the painting I'll probably have a quick look at it and see if anything else needs changing, and I'll turn those dots into birds in the distance. That's the only thing with a rigger, you have to watch that you don't flick paint all over your painting. Okay, so the painting is pretty much finished. I've made a few tweaks here and there, just tidying things up, and I'm just adding these 3 birds in the distance. A little bit of composition just helps the eye flow towards that focal point. And I think we're done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something from this, and I hope you can think about copying it if you're a beginner, or even if you're not. Please give it a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos. Thanks again for watching.